In early 2014, I was introduced to this man's work. His ideas on the importance of challenge, grit, resilience, and living the team life completely changed my thinking. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to David Rutherford, ex-Navy SEAL, poet warrior, author, and speaker. That's this week on the Badass Agile podcast. Greetings, team. Welcome to the Badass Agile podcast. I'm your host, Chris Williams. All right, my friends, you're in for a treat this week. No joke. Listen, when I host people on this show, I have 2 recorders going. For this man, no joke, I've got 3. It's the man himself, David Rutherford, ex-Navy SEAL, poet warrior, podcaster, broadcaster. Man, it's an honor to have you on the show today. How you doing, David?
Chris, thank you so much for letting me be here with you this morning, man. I'm above dirt, and nobody has taken a shot at me today where I live, so it's a good day.
I'm glad to hear that. And it's some crazy times we're living in, man. How are you and the family holding up through all this?
That's I appreciate that, man. A lot of people don't start out with that type of question, but I really appreciate it. We're good. You know, we have 4, not small kids, but ages from 12 to 7. And it's been a adjustment for them, but they're troopers and they're doing well. And then my beautiful fiance, she is the glue that holds us all together, that makes this wonderful machine of our household work and get it done. So everybody's okay. I think in the grander, concept of where we could be in life, and as opposed to a lot of other people around the world right now, we're doing awesome. Thank you.
Man,
how about you and yours, Chris?
Hey, everyone's great here, man. So thank you for asking, first of all. And before we begin, so first of all, you started out, I want to say you had an English degree, right?
No, I was getting an art major with a minor in poetry.
Got it. Okay. So you've got a liberal arts degree. You were shooting for Division I football, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yeah. I started playing flag tag, I think, at 4 years old.
Whoa.
Played a few years of that, and then right into Pop Warner. It's called Boca Jets, where I was from, and played all the way up through high school. Did a postgraduate year at a prep school up in Connecticut, and ended up not getting any real D1 offers. But thankfully, I was pretty decent at lacrosse, and I got a D1 offer from Penn State, and I figured, hell, man, I'll go there. Joe Paterno loves walk-ons. He's known for it, and I'll walk on, and I'll win the Heisman Trophy at Penn State.
So when you didn't get on the path to do that, you then became a United States Navy SEAL, although maybe not that quickly. And,
there was a bit of a time in between that decision where it got a little dark for me.
For sure. And then you went on to, you've done combat medic. I think you've done a BUDS instructor.
Not BUDS. I taught a course called SQT, SEAL Qualification Training. So BUDS is a basic in-doc into the SEAL program. And then once you finish BUDS, you do, when I taught it was a 31-week course. Now I think it's a 42-week course. So.
Got it. Okay. And then after you retired, you did some defense contracting. So you went back overseas. You have since been a podcaster. You're the author of 2 great books. And
3. Actually 4.
All right. We're going to have to run through all the titles then, because clearly I missed something. Sorry for the miss there, but.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I took 1 down, and I'm in the process of turning that into a Doc Frog book. So essentially 3 kids book, 1 adult book, and I've got 1 adult book in the works right now.
Okay, awesome. So for those of you who listen to this show and have listened for the past, 3 years, those of you who know my work, those of you who are in the Forge program, it all started with this man, If you open
man.
up my Kindle, the very first book, because I resisted Kindle forever, very first book on my list is a picture of a clean-shaven young pup named David Rutherford with his book, Navy SEAL Self-Confidence. Ladies, you owe yourself the pleasure of having a look at this young man with no beard. And everyone needs to read this book. Now,
Oh, wow. Thanks, Chris.
this book was the thin edge of the wedge that changed my life in a positive direction to where I am today. So for me, this is a special episode. So Dave, you're going to get off this show and you're going to be looking at your family and say, you know what? He's right. There should be a street named after Dave Rutherford. And then your kids are going to be like, you've been talking to your fans again, haven't you? So before we begin, Dave, I always like to recalibrate with my tribe and take a minute to remember why we listen to this show and why I do this show. So for those of you out there, you know the words, you can sing along. To create an elite tribe of leaders who truly serve their clients and communities by doing what matters and what works, relentlessly chasing value and excellence like a badass. There's so many resources out there about what you need to do to be agile, but we focus on who you need to become in order to lead teams. So let's hammer down those fundamentals to create a truly unique and powerful force in this industry. And guys, if this show helps you, do me a favor, just tell your friends. All right, here he is, David Rutherford. I've got 2 questions to explore with you today. The first one is, what have you learned at this point in your career from your experience with Navy SEALs, from your experience in the real world doing the job every day, that we can take on in the business world? I'm fascinated with the question of how do we get regular civilian teams to behave in some of the ways that you've learned and you've seen. And then the second question was inspired by you yourself. When we spoke, you mentioned, hey, it's been, now a decade and change since we even started hearing from ex-Navy SEALs. Back then, it was kind of a new thing. We didn't meet too many people who have been, how long have you been out of the forces now, been retired?
Well, I did 8 years in the teams, got out of the teams in 03, then Blackwater 04 to 06, and then the agency 08 to 2011. My last deployment was the fall of 2011, so a little bit of time now.
Right. So 10 years hence, you're a retired man. I'm interested in knowing, what's your purpose now? What's the second stage for you? Because being a warrior is, to a point, a younger man's game, right? Latest you can go in is what, 27, something like that?
Yeah, unless you get a waiver, and I think the max you can waiver out at, I think now is like 31 maybe.
Right. So still for the fairly young guys, but as we progress through life, our meaning changes, our purpose changes. So that's the second question I've got for you. If you're cool, if you're down with those 2.
Absolutely.
So let's hit that first one. Tell me about Frog Logic, first of all.
Frog Logic was really kind of this concept that resulted after an experience I had in my second deployment to Afghanistan. And this, I was working with Blackwater at the time. I had come on with them as a kind of an international training and curriculum development specialist. And I had spent the first almost year working in a country called Azerbaijan, and we were helping redesign what's called a FID mission. And FID missions are foreign internal defense, and typically special operations groups, in order to keep up relations with allies, they'll send special operations groups to these various countries and they'll work with their counterparts. So we were there working with the Azeri SEALs, if you will. And then after that program, went over to Afghanistan for my second trip there and worked with the Afghan counter-drug police. As everybody knows, Afghanistan is one of the world's top producers for raw opium. And went over there, and the idea was we had deployed DEA fast teams over there to really try and kind of assess and disrupt a little bit of that supply in order to gain some critical real-world intel on, because all the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, now ISIS, everything over there, government, is all tied to the opium production. Everything is. It's country's largest GDP. And I think when I was there, it was about 86% of the GDP came from opium.
Can you imagine?
No, and the
Wow.
numbers are staggering, actually. And I mean, this was back in 2000, fall of 2005, and the Taliban had really, when they got into power, they had stopped or at least locked down the control of opium, and they were sitting on it, and so they cornered the market in the world, and then they opened the floodgates and started reaping the rewards, and we're talking billions of dollars worth of revenue. You know, I mean, it's crazy. And in fact, at one point, we're doing this thing, and they were pushing, I think it was like 1,600 tons of raw opium over the Uzbek border every week.
Wow.
Yeah, every week. And so it was a big deal. But we were on a mission. I was supporting, kind of mentoring the group that we had been teaching, and kind of was a dry hole, a lot of bad intel over there at that level. And in that experience, we had hit this compound, and after my guys were done, I kind of sat there and was looking around, and it was every time you hit a compound overseas, regardless of where it is, especially in Afghanistan, and that's the only place I've really been under combat environments. And you hit a compound, and the compound's filled with children. There's tons of kids, tons of females, few adult males, and then animals, and so we'd hit. And after I was standing there, and I'm just sitting there watching these kids, and it was like a normal, regular day for them. And that was the first time that I ever really had a substantial amount of empathy hit my heart instead of apathy, because my first deployment over there was not even a year after 9/11, and so I had really conjured a true hatred for all things Afghanistan. And in those few years after, I had definitely matured as a result of understanding that hatred is incredibly destructive for a human being to have hate in their heart. I mean, it just devastates you psychologically. And in this period, I just saw these kids, and it hit me that, I wanted to do something to help the children of warfare, and started kind of researching. Because of my medical background, I really imagined that I would, maybe work with Doctors Without Borders. Maybe I'd work for USAID or something, some way that could get me in these countries to where I could be of some kind of assistance. I didn't know what it was or how it was, but if I could do something. Well, when I came back from that deployment, I had really grown pretty weary, or leery, I should say, of certain nonprofits and the way they conduct themselves overseas. They're a lot of times the idealism within the nonprofit far exceeds their ability to understand the level of safety concerns that are there. And in fact, a Navy SEAL died later on at DevGru. A guy named Nick Check had died on a rescue mission. And it's actually a rescue mission that enabled Ed Byers to receive the Medal of Honor. I mean, he didn't want it because his best friend died on it. But so it's they don't always have great safety in mind, but they do beautiful things around the world. But so I didn't think culturally I would have been able to clash. So when I came home, I just kept researching. Well, I just kind of, as you're doing research on child development, child, health, I came across an article that really talked about childhood obesity in the States. And I saw that one county in Texas in particular, that's 65 plus, I think, percent of the population of kids in their teens were morbidly obese in this county. And that hit me.
Yeah.
And it made me realize that we're at war here for our children. And it's not the war that, comes frontal assault on you with guys wearing quad nods and M4s and stuff, but it's a war of attrition against the future of our children. And what really clinched it was I had found an article by a couple guys in over up at Harvard who were talking about doing research on something they called internet withdrawal syndrome. And it was the desocialization of child mind based on being hyper connected to a device or to the internet or to a computer and gaming. And they had some pretty stark predictions for it. And that was the catalyst for Frog Logic. That was the moment where I said, man, I need to do something to be able to help these kids. And as I was doing all this research, it's like, what do I take from my life and how do I transfer it to kids? And one of the things that really stood out as I evaluated my psychological evolution from athletics into the teams through art was, that kids needed self-confidence, in particular from the ages of 8 to 15. And that was really the spark for me, which ignited Frog Logic, which I've been doing ever since.
And your logo is a picture of a frog on the human brain, which has got a couple of things merged together. First of all, the colloquial term for a Navy SEAL is the frogman, right? That's a term that you did use, maybe still use. And then there's blended into that is the notion of the reptilian brain, or that 2 million year old organ that's controlling our lives without us knowing it, potentially. So I love what you're doing with the kids, first of all, because I think a big solution to some of the problems that we're having is re-indoctrinating kids away from what's on the devices and the gaming consoles and to real life, get outside and play, communicate like humans, put the phone down, be present, be there. And I don't think society realizes, even the grown-ups that I teach and I coach, they're glued to their phones and they don't realize that your attention is for sale. So people are working very hard to addict you to those devices because there's money in that. If I've got your attention, if I got your eyeballs, I can sell you something.
Always.
And if you listen to guys like Gary Vaynerchuk, they're very aware of it and they're capitalizing on it. Not to criticize the guy because he's brilliant, but it is a war that we have to fight back against. So what are some of the lessons? When I first read and encountered Navy SEAL self-confidence, I remember some of those lessons as have never heard it before. First thing, the term you use is suck it up, buttercup. So it's like lean into the crappy stuff. I took away swim buddies. Nobody, we talk about teams in business all the time. Nobody talks swim buddy. Nobody talks person-to-person accountability, support, asking for help. And there's a ton of other wisdom that it's not in regular learning. It's not in personal or team development anywhere, totally unique. So what are some of the things that you learned, or what are some of your favorite stories from your team days that are translatable now when you're coaching sports teams, when you're coaching enterprise? What are some of the big ones that you really feel the world needs to hear right now?
I appreciate the question and also, the concept of peer accountability. I mean, that's really at its core how we're able to thrive under extreme environments, right? And that's what Frog Logic essentially has become. It's a motivational training and performance coaching company. And over the years, it's evolved out of those first initial concepts of the 8 missions to help people forge their self-confidence. Well, now it's really a more complete program. And the 4 main things that I focus on within Frog Logic is first teach people how to embrace their fears. Then it's teach them how to forge. Once their fears they've got a grasp of that, now they can really begin to work on that self-confidence. And I teach people to forge their self-confidence. And then once they have those 2 things down, now they can really generate and commit themselves to a total team-oriented life, right? Getting rid of the selfishness and becoming selfless. And then the final thing is once you have all those 3 down, you're in a great place to really start searching for what your purpose is. So It's fear, confidence, team orientation, and purpose. And those are the 4 main concepts within Frog Logic. And within the last 2 or 3 years, I've expanded into the next level, which is culture and really understanding the complexities of culture and how to formulate great culture from within.
Mm-hmm. Now, for those of you listening, you may be saying, you started off the episode talking about opium trade in Afghanistan. You may be wondering what this has to do with Agile, but one thing I'm noticing about you is that you're Agile without even knowing it. In the sense that you released, version 1 of Frog Logic, and then over time you refined it and simplified it, probably stripped away the things that were not essential, and shine a light on the things that are really connecting with people. Which part of your Frog Logic system do you find is really resonating with regular folks? Like, what do people really get magnetized to?
Wow, that's a great question. I think the two biggest ones within it are the team life. I mean, people just really want to understand how to create great teams nowadays. I mean, it's all based on, everybody knows individually it's very difficult to achieve any metric of success that, makes us available for that grander sense of self-actualization. And so the team life concept is really, I'd probably do 40, 50 events, speaking events a year. And out of those, I'd say I give my team life seminar 65%. And then the other one is fear. And right now, fear is the number one place people are searching and finding me and really are resonating with these ideas about fear. So,
okay. Well, let's come back to teams in a minute then, and let's talk about fear, because as you say, it's everywhere. But even when I go to coach corporate teams or individuals who are building tribes and so on, when you look at the thing that stops people from doing the disciplined work, whether it's eating healthy, whether it's doing the PT, the physical training, whether it's committing to the mission, whether it's committing to a partner or to a team, the thing that always holds people back has something to do with fear. The excuse making is based on fear, that kind of stuff. So tell me a little bit more about what you've learned about fear and how to conquer it.
Well, it's impossible to conquer fear. Absolutely. There's when I first got into it, because it was crazy. One of the first big speaking events I did was with a buddy of mine who I actually blessed, who changed the course of my life just kind of randomly. This guy, Kyle, and hired me to come. He worked for a company called Pioneer Investments, and they're a marketing, what do you call it? Geez, I'm drawing a blank right now, but they're a company that sells mutual funds. And he brought me in and, went to an event. And afterwards, this guy is a top client, and it was a client event of his. He looks at me and goes, David, weren't you afraid? Weren't you afraid of what you were doing? Wasn't it scary? And that was a real question that I think I've got a lot. Were you afraid? Was it scary? And I tell you what, you drive around a countryside with 25 million landmines in a dune buggy. Yeah, that's scary stuff. Or you get shot at, that's scary stuff. Or you're hitting a target with, how many unknown people on there who have guns who would kill you like it was nothing. That's scary. Mm-hmm. And so I started this research on fear. And after about 4 or 5 years, I kind of felt like I was in a position to really be able to start teaching it. And the greatest challenge that people have is this illusion that we can defeat fear, that there is some place in the foreseeable future where it doesn't play a major role in our life. And that's just simply not the case. I've found a couple random case studies. I found a woman from like the 50s who had her amygdalas weren't really shaped or formed in her limbic system. And, you could put a full grown male cat in front of her and she'd be like, look at the pretty kitty, and nothing. And, and then I think recently a place where I think the world was exposed to it is that beautiful movie called Solo about Alex Honnold's, world, feat of climbing El Capitan with no ropes. Mm-hmm. And there's a part where he gets a CAT scan and they see that his amygdalas are a little underdeveloped or they don't engage as much and then what they assume or the correlation they make is to the lack of love he received from his parents and especially from his father as a kid because his dad had Asperger's. So he didn't know how to overtly express love. So that component of his emotional structure was underdeveloped. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we are hardwired for fear. It's fundamentally the most substantial component of our neural pathways, our neurology, how our brain functions. There's nothing more important than that other than absolutely the concept of love, but that's still a great mystery, right? And so when you realize that we're wired for it, that it affects us physiologically, it changes our pulse rate, that you start to feel the spidey senses tingle, your intuition, all these things really change the way we function and work. And so when you realize that we're wired for fear, the next step you get to, obviously, when you dig in, is that we've been taught fear our whole lives. We're perpetually teaching fear, and we're inundated with fear. I mean, it's everywhere around us. And so those two things combined make it an impossibility to be able to defeat or overcome or anything. But what you can do is through a concept called stress inoculation, you can learn to utilize fear and change your perception of fear to where it can become inspirational, and to where you get to a point where you allow yourself to go through some of the most difficult military training on the planet, and you're willing to run into gunfire next to your buddies. So that's kind of the concept.
So what's the process for managing that fear rather than conquering it? Great point. But what are you trained to do, or what do you do back in the teams and now in your current role? What are your fears now, and how do you face them on a daily basis? If you have a process, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. Absolutely. All right. So I have tons of fear. I mean, first and foremost, my 4 daughters. I mean, the fear that's involved in every aspect of raising a child.
Yeah.
You can write down, 10 3-ring binders of fear, right, when you're dealing with your child, right?
One by one, the boyfriends come home.
I'm not even really afraid of that. I worked through that. The first thing, when I had my first daughter back in the day, that was obviously the easiest concept to allow to derail the positivity of parenting, right?
Yeah.
But it's much more than that. It's their intellectualism, their worldview, their morals, their value systems, their athleticism, their ability to compete, their ability to adapt, their ability to remain agile, if you will. And so, what do you have to do? I always start out, in mission 1 is you have to search for the truth of your fear. Because there's a truth in all of our fear, where it originated, how it evolved, and then what you did to hold on to it, to allow it to perpetuate its manifestations in your consciousness every day. And so if you're not willing to do the work to dig into that, then those fears are always going to play a role in your decision process and your ability to adapt or adjust to these evolving purpose statements in your life. And so I really try and think, just if people take 2 seconds and just try and understand where their fear comes from, at a minimum, that's the start.
How do you help people who don't know that their fear is dominating their decisions and their actions?
That's a great question right there. That's the ultimate question, right? Because what do? We learn how to lie right from the get-go. And a lot of people believe that lying is just completely innate, that it's just built into our system of preservation. And if you go overseas in certain cultures, lying is every bit as part of their cultural reality as accents or cultural garb or traditions or rituals.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Right? Yeah, it's a massive component in many cultures around the world. And when you begin to understand the power that we have the great psychological technical term would be our rationalization, our ability to rationalize decision based on those deep-rooted fears that we have of rejection, of the hierarchies that they might result as a result of opening our mouths. So I think it's critical to really begin to understand that we all lie, that every human being lies. We lie every day. Hopefully most people don't lie, in those grand Machiavellian lies where we're out to destroy others for our own benefit, although that happens substantially around the world every day. But where we lie most is to ourselves. And if you can get somebody to recognize those lies, and the way I do that is I test people, right? We have to be tested. We have to understand the truth of our limitations and our abilities before we can really begin to address where those discrepancies come from, or where those, the positive aspects of our abilities come from. And it's really typically rooted in our fears.
And so how do you, if I may ask, how do you test for that, if you can give a general case?
Absolutely. So with you, what I do is, do you swim at all, Chris?
I don't.
All right. Do you run at all,
Sure,
or
yeah.
jog? So you jog. How fast could you run 2 miles?
I think I timed myself once, 2 miles. Let's imagine 13 minutes or something.
Okay, 13 minutes. You think you can do 13 minutes. All right, so what we would do is we'd set that time and we'd go out and we'd run the 2 miles. And then we'd time it. And when you came back, that's your reality. And so what we do is we evaluate the reality from your perceived reality. Right?
Okay.
If, let's say, you come in at 22 minutes, and if that variation is substantial, then it correlates to the magnitude of variable that you might insist upon as your own reality.
Right.
And that's kind of how I do it. And if a person says, I'm an expert at coaching, okay, let me see you coach.
Right.
And we'll see how good they are. We'll see, how they approach the individual.
Right.
Are they coaching based on your own life experience and forcing that on the other person, or are you bringing your information to the individual and then you evaluate that individual and you really dig into what their motivational triggers are, and then you apply your knowledge based on their triggers, their drivers.
Right. Okay. So for, again, a civilian or a business team, someone may be looking for a promotion, and you say, great, what actions are you taking towards getting that promotion, towards earning that promotion? And, they'll document, well, I started doing this, but then I got distracted with that. And then a new project came up and I said yes and blah, blah, blah. And you're saying, well, hold on a second, though. You said the promotion was the most important thing in your life right now, but you're not taking the action that corresponds to nailing that promotion. And it's at that point when you compare what they claim to be important against what they actually do, there's your metric. So in Agile, we like to make work visible. Post your stats, state your goal, and then state your outcomes. And then, quote unquote, the lie is around the corner. If there's a gap there, the lie ain't far behind. Does that make sense?
100%. And really what happens, and the reason why so many organizations, and I work with companies, I help them evaluate training, I help them with management coaching, I help them with recruiting. I help a lot of different companies in a lot of different ways. And the number one way is as inspiring motivation within your personnel to strive to achieve at higher productivity rates. And as everybody is, especially right now, because people have 4 or 5 jobs at one time right now. Economy we're in. And so what you have to make sure, the problem is there's so much ambiguity with roles and responsibilities and people are so ready to give autonomy away as if it's this predetermined concept within organizations. Simply, most likely, because if you flip it around, you put the mirror on yourself, you're just too lazy to establish clear roles and responsibilities for people.
Right.
In the teams or working for the agency, what your job is every day. What the expectation is going to be. And it's honed in on every day. There's never a day that you go into work where it's not a distinct portion of the expectation for your peers and your superiors. And so that makes, if you stay in that lane and you continue and you do your job the best of your ability, because you're under that microscope of scrutiny, you succeed. And we've proven that over the past 70 plus years on the battlefields around the world.
Now, you raise an interesting point, jumping back to teams. And thank you for that exploration into fear, because that's fascinating. But let's talk about teams for a second. In your world, we can disqualify some. So if you're not familiar with that BUDS process, the screening process, if you will, for a Navy SEAL, the short story of it is it's intentionally, frustratingly difficult to simulate, high stress combat situations so that you either quit because you just realize this isn't worth it to me, which is the good news. If you quit because it's not worth it to you, you're the wrong person to defend your country at the highest level. The next thing that can happen is that you get ground down to the point where
Chris, can I hop in right there? I want to be. I'm a kind of a stickler
Absolutely.
on the description. Sorry.
Yep.
Personal worth. That's relative, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, in every day we figure out in some capacity, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, how to generate worth within ourselves, and that's what ultimately gets us out of bed at whatever level.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about worth with us; it's about capability.
Okay.
And what we do is like you said, we apply, and I call it the positive application of pain.
Yep.
We apply so much pain on the individual physically, mentally, and emotionally that the individual is forced to be honest with themselves and say, I can't live this life for an extended period of time.
Right.
And I don't believe it's in me that I can endure this level of stress, this level of fear for a long period of time. And that's why our dropout rate or our quit rate is about 86, 87%.
Right. So thanks for that clarification. I appreciate it very much. The point I was coming to is that you can't do that test in the corporate world. We can't screen candidates for a human resources job using the same techniques. So the challenge
you could, but you'd go to jail.
You could, but you'd go to jail. That's right. That's right. How do we find out what people are made of and to what extent what are they willing to go through to become their personal best for their own sake or for the sake of a customer, a team, or whatever? What are some things that can be done to at least simulate the outcomes, if not the actual process, which, as you said, is almost inhumane?
Well, I mean, that's and that's the magic question. I mean, I get this all the time, Chris. How do I turn my team into the Navy SEALs of this or the Navy SEALs? And I joke with them. I say, all right, go get a rubber inflatable boat, put it in the middle of your coffee break lounge, fill it with ice water. And anytime somebody screws up, go have them hit the ice water boat and see what happens. And they're like, well, I don't think HR is going to like that. And I go, exactly. We've allowed HR to run roughshod on us. And now even more so with this cancel culture. I mean, accountability is where it was before, I thought it was, just kind of seeping through the cracks. Now it's just flowing through the grates of all of our organizations. And so if you can't do those things, which I don't recommend. I mean, when I first started this back in 2006, I tried to really implement as close to that as possible, the militaristic mindset or the special operations mindset into an organization. It's just failed miserably because it doesn't work. And so through agility and my understanding to, adapt to what does and doesn't work, I came to realize that, man, you still have to apply the pain. You still have to put your people in duress. And the easiest way, which legitimately should not take any special considerations from your senior leadership or HR, is just to run rehearsals. Conduct rehearsals. Force an individual to perform their job under evaluation and scrutiny and watch what they do. And if they can't do that, then, that's right there. If you get somebody that says, I don't feel comfortable with the pressure you're putting, I feel unsafe with that, then thank you very much. I appreciate your time, but we don't want you. Because if a person isn't willing to feel the pressures of the immediate goals or tasks at hand and be available to be evaluated by those things, then that person is living a lie.
Is there anything that you do when you're hired to coach teams and statistically, you're going to have some of those don't wanna people in the crowd. Is there anything that can be done to teach them, to enlighten them, to show them that, hey, you're living a certain way, but it's a bit of a lie. You have to get comfortable with challenge. We call it, getting wet and sandy. What's your wet and sandy? And let's see if I can bring you there safely. Again, not with a rubber inflatable boat and all that stuff and a 300-pound log, but how can I get you to see that? Because I read your book and it was an eye opener in the sense that, we're expected to enjoy and laugh and have fun at some of the things that we normally say, this sucks, I hate this, the whining and all that stuff that gets started. Is there something that you can do to help that person turn?
It's a difficult question. If I speak in generalities, I believe there's 30% of any group that's going to be comfortable with operating at the lowest possible performance threshold there is. And a performance threshold is the max ability a human being can conjure up in a particular operational environment, right? Mm-hmm. What is the max level you can produce? And there's the overwhelming majority of the world operates from about 20 to 25, 30% max performance threshold because they've just never gone out and really exposed themselves to test what their true limits are. Mm-hmm. And so, that 30%, there's an expectation of performance they're just never going to go over. So, if they're in a job that, you require a significant result from them, then I think you need to reevaluate your perception of performance because they just can't do it. Right. Where there's another group that operates from that 30% to 50%, which are your elite performers in the world. People that have a correlative tendency of performance. They understand the importance of performance. They can articulate, and then they can also have that self-evaluation be present in how they communicate. Right, you can hear it in the words they choose to use.
Right, now,
and then there's your top group that they're just going to do it anyways.
You've got it. Now, for you, when you went through BUD/S, I know you had a couple of physical injuries, and you struggled, and you write about that struggle. What is it about you that made you say, I'm not quitting. I'm going to keep doing this until they either kick me out or I pass the damn thing?
My purpose for not quitting, and every person has their own unique purpose, right? And this was something that when I was on the Team Never Quit podcast with Marcus Luttrell, the basis of the podcast was we'd interview people and they'd give us their greatest never quit story. Mm-hmm. And within the 125 or 24 shows I did there, really interviewed some pretty remarkable human beings. And what I discovered are there's some root causes behind that never quit mentality. Well, mine was I was coming off 4 years of pretty substantial bout of depression, and not achieving that mark of playing Division I football. And because I couldn't do it or didn't realize or wasn't able to, or, really I wasn't willing to feel the failure, if you will. And that fear of failure was what distracted me ultimately. I quit on that dream and that sent me into this 4-year spiral. And when I figured, I call it my first real moment, a God moment in my life. And in that moment, God, I had that inspiration that I needed to go test myself at the highest possible level on the highest possible team there was. And that's SEAL team. So when I got rolled the first time out of class 205 for ITB problems, and then I got rolled into 206, and then first week of first phase, I got stress fractures. I got, luckily, by the grace of God, I had another miracle in my life. Chief Warrant Officer Rewerts, a plank owner of Dev Group, saved my career. And because of my attitude, right? Because I was a motivator, I was positive, I cared about my classmates, and he had seen that, so he granted me the base training officer said they shouldn't drop me. And then the performance failure 208 for pool comp. Each one of those moments when I was at my lowest, I said, if I don't make it through this, there's no doubt I'm going to go back to that place of depression. in which many cases during that I had suicidal inclinations.
Right.
And I knew that the ulterior, the ultimatum for me was, if I don't make this, if I quit intentionally, I mean, granted, I could, medically be dropped because my body just couldn't do it for some reason or other. But if I mentally quit because it was just too damn hard, then I knew I'd be dead.
Right. Man, thanks for sharing that story. That's a very personal story, and I appreciate it so much. Much respect. Now, I have a question jumping back to when we were talking about switching those people who are in that 30%, very, very low standards for performance. Let me ask you this question. I don't know if this will stump you or not, but it's a tough one. If you found out or realized that one of your daughters was in that category, they're just not showing up full out, they're making excuses. In effect, they're lying to themselves about what they're capable of. Just imagine, I'm sure that wouldn't happen in your family because you're raising them, but imagine you found that out. What would you do or say to try to influence them to change?
That's probably one of the greatest questions that anybody's ever asked me. Thank you for that, Chris.
My pleasure. Thank you for the compliment.
Because what it does is it cuts through the bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gets right to the heart of my ability as a coach, the heart of my ability as a father, as a parent, which is the greatest fear I have.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do understand that, genetics play a role, but so does the nurture or the nature of the nurture-nature conundrum that we face. But yeah, I'm sure, one of my daughters is going to be great at sports, and the other might be really good at art, and the other one might be great at math or English or whatever. And so the individual expectation becomes tempered, because especially in their developmental years. Now, when they're in their late 20s, what the brain starts really ceases to continue to, it's the development of your cognitive functionality really ends right about 24 to 28. And that's where your brain is pretty much set on its development after that. So, if I go to these girls, and hopefully I'm still alive, and when they're in their late 20s and early 30s, and I can evaluate them and see a conscientious decision to undershoot their potentiality, that's when I'll go in. But if there's a very real present inability that is correlative to their cognitive or behavioral abilities, or, because there's so many factors involved. I mean, humans are so complicated that, you have to get to a place of acceptance. And certain people are just not prepared to be the leaders we want them to be. And so you have to mitigate your expectations of a human being based on the reality of their capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very well said. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. So listen, I said there was a second topic I wanted to hit, and we don't have to spend as much time on, obviously, but it's now that you are, 10 years almost out of the service, out of the forces, your mission has to change. You're no longer picking up a sword on a daily basis when the country calls. So what's your new mission? What's now really important and emotionally engaging and compelling to David Rutherford right now?
My mission in life is pretty simple. And through my faith, I've been able to refine it down to a pretty specific thing. And my mission is to, through my message of teaching people that in the most extreme environments imaginable lie our greatest lessons of who we are as human beings, and ultimately finding our true purpose, being able to answer those questions of who am I and why am I here. So my mission in life is to reach that one person today. Right? Today, as I wake up, my mission is to inspire one human being to be able to move forward in a way that improves their life in the midst of the hardships, the pain, the suffering that is life. And I've chosen kind of how to do that through the profession that I've undertaken.
Yeah, and what really shows up about you is if you engage with David Rutherford on Facebook or Twitter, you'll notice a couple things. First of all, there's the notion of the poet warrior, which I know you've changed from warrior poet, but there's that side of you that is really creative and really expressive. And it's a huge part of who you are and how you inspire. And there's also, there's a sense of the man on fire. Like when you get going, it's fun and inspiring and engaging to watch. But there's also that sense of a man discussing really quite publicly the daily wrestle with the demons and the negativity and those things that are showing up for all of us. So that's really unique because a lot of ex-soldiers get on the air and they just talk about, the war stories and the toughness and the stoicism, but I really feel like you're putting it out there in a different way that's more relatable for people. That's a conscious choice. You have to choose to expose yourself like that every day. And I'm curious why that's important to you.
I appreciate again, Chris. You're on fire, man, with these questions. I love it, brother.
I told you, I warned you, man.
Yeah,
they should name a street after Dave Rutherford.
No, I don't want that.
I know you don't. I'm just playing with you.
Man, what a powerful question. I believe that God gave me couple gifts. One of those gifts is my passion for people and wanting to motivate them. I've just always had that motivational component within me. And I think it comes from, two wonderful parents who just are inspiring and who care deeply for human beings and want to help people and inspire people. And I'm blessed to have had that, to watch that as a kid. And then the other is my art. From the earliest moments, I could just draw. I just looked at life through the lens of art and had that deep appreciation for what art does and what it represents for us. Because when a person is able to really trigger a creative spark that they're willing to not only allow that to come out on them, whether it's in a song or a performance or a journal entry or a poem or whatever the hell it is, a picture, they are releasing a component of their soul out into the open. And there's much in life that we do to try and protect that exposure, to put the armor around that exposure in order to be able to, not be judged. We struggle with judgment in life, but yet all of life is judgment, right? It's these kind of predetermined hierarchies of societal development. And man, for me, going from the warrior, one of the reasons why I wanted to be a medic is because I was petrified that component of me, that artist, that romantic, that Renaissance influence would be decimated by the very real process of indoctrination, because that's what you have to do. You have to submit to the indoctrination process to become a real warrior. And so I wanted to be a medic, so I didn't lose that. And luckily it helped tremendously. But for a greater part of about a decade or more, as I got out, I tried to live in that warrior space, tried to keep the rock on. And although I have some real blessed friends out there who would, support, my abilities as an operator, man, I'm an artist. That's who I am. And I had to come to grips with that.
Wow.
And it as not a detriment to my self-reflect, my ability to self-reflect, to say, all right, I'm good. I can carry a gun. I can do all those other things, but man, I want to create to spark people to think. And that's where the shift really happened. And it really came to fruition after going through my divorce. That was a real eye-opener for me in life.
Of course, it would have to be. But I admire so much, anytime you see somebody produce art, whether it's music or whatever it happens to be, you're seeing courage in action, because to put it out there is an act of massive courage in the first place. So,
well, think about it. Think about what human beings do, right? And think about what I mean, look at what happens on Twitter, or look what happens on social media. People, I mean, hell, there was a young girl whose father was essentially assassinated. He's a police officer down in Texas, and she put online this beautiful, sentimental, heartfelt memory of her father and what he meant as a hero. And she was attacked online, and with some horrific things were said to her. So, we live in a world where, especially through the perceived anonymity of the internet, that we can just throw daggers at people. And so when you put yourself out there in a genuine way, because there's a lot of people put themselves out there in a manufactured way.
Yeah.
But when you put yourself out there in a genuine way where you really come from the heart, man, that's a scary, scary, fearful thing.
It truly is. And I always say that if you're true to your authentic voice, your tribe will find you. You're never going to be for everybody. There's always going to be haters. But the people who stick with you because you're authentic, you can affect real change with them. And that's so important. And, I think for you, the people that listen to your podcast, that read your books, they're there because they're those true fans. Not because having fans is important, but because your message resonates. Your authenticity resonates with them. I think it's a big lesson that people can learn from you personally.
Well, what's the hardest thing to do? I mean, think about the earliest, Chris, the earliest pieces of influence that you had as a young man. Right. And where those came from and for me, the real powerful one started when I was 12, 13 years old. And, it was great generals from World War II, but it was also Jimi Hendrix and these artists over here. And so I had this sensation of duality about but when you start to dig in and you really look at people that have influenced you in their lives, man, there's a lot of stories that are very positive, but there's also a lot of stories that are very tragic as well too. And as you begin to develop, what we do is we mimic. I mean, that's what human beings like to do, and we mimic stylistically, we mimic creatively, we mimic business models, we mimic our peers, and that's what we do. And we find, like you said, we find those tribes that we can assimilate into that make us feel the most comfortable. And what, my father and mother really showed me, but dad in particular, is that, man, this world is a massive place. And there's so many incredible things to be influenced by. Don't fall prey to the commonplace of groupthink.
That's right.
Don't fall prey to the natural assimilation into the where you are culturally. Whether you go to a school, you pick a group of friends, and then you just stay in this one kind of trajectory your whole life, man. Because the real exploration of who you are, exists in around the world. It exists in all the different books that you could possibly read. And it exists in your what you watch and what you listen to. It exists in who you meet and all these different things. So if you really want to begin to explore the totality of life itself, man, you have to be willing to put yourself out there.
Yeah. Whether
it's through conversation, which is the most critical aspect of putting yourself. It's the most creative, the most naturally creative thing that we have is our ability to converse with somebody on a meaningful level.
Yeah. Yes.
And the more you do that, the more you grow.
Wow. I love it. You're bringing stuff that I've never had on the show before, and I thank you for that. Let's cleanse the palate with an interesting question. If I hit resume on your music player right now, what's going to start playing?
That's so awesome. So right now, you familiar with who Moby is?
Yes. Yeah.
The electronic dance guy.
Yep.
He developed a big thing with artists, and especially instrumental artists right now, is they're developing these calming sleep albums. And so he has one called Long Ambience 1, which is calm sleep. And I use those to reset my neuropatterning as I go to sleep at night. So that's what's in there right now. And then what I typically like to do is put on my songs list and then push shuffle and to see what comes up. And it could range from, Miles Davis to Mozart to Ice Cube to you to Nirvana, you name it. I have a passion for every type of artistic influence from musically that I can get, so I can really process. And just to give you another, for instance, like all weekend, my very good friend of mine, Charlie Daniels, died last week.
I'm aware, I know, and I'm sorry because I know that impacted you.
Yeah, it was a substantial thing, but in a very positive way. In a very positive way, because after the last 6 years of working with to help them raise money for their veterans charity, which is called the Journey Home Project, I got to know Charlie, but more importantly, I got to know his manager, David Corlew, and he's become one of my greatest mentors I've ever had in my life. And so to go up and be a part of that and to watch that, it really, what the impactful thing for me was that the way people spoke of Charlie, and this is a guy that, and people don't know this, he played on 3 Bob Dylan albums. He played on Ringo Starr. He toured with Leonard Cohen for a year. He toured with the Grateful Dead. He toured with Rod Stewart, the Rolling Stones. I mean, he's been one of the biggest musicians. He was in the Music Hall of Fame, the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Grand Ole Opry Hall of Fame.
He's an achiever.
He was an incredible, but more so, it was who he was as a human being. He cared deeply for people.
Wow.
And in that was his humility. And he was the same guy at 83 when he passed as he was when he was 23 or 33 or 43. And what you take away from that is he never altered who he was.
Right.
And it wasn't about, there's this great story. I think I can tell now that he's passed. That David told me a few years back, he was going to get an insane amount of money from Dodge. They were going to use his Devil Went Down to Georgia. They wanted to use it for a Hellcat commercial for their, what is it, Charger, Challenger, whatever it is. And in it, they were going to make the car be smoking like it was a demon or something. And, and they spent, a lot of money developing. Well, they showed it to Charlie and he smiled and he says, that's really nice, gentlemen and ladies, they're really beautifully done. But I'm sorry, I can't have my song affiliated with something that conjures up the devil or evil or something like that. He's just like, I'm sorry, thank you very much, but no, thank you. And David, it's like, Charlie, what are you doing? This is a major national ad campaign. It was, what are you doing? And he goes, David, he goes, I've done a lot of horrible things that I'm not proud of in my life. I'm certainly, when I go have to answer for all my sins, I'm not going to get kicked out of heaven for a Dodge commercial. And that just shows who the man was, his integrity.
Yeah.
And so for me, as I am trying to navigate this crazy world of essentially the entertainment world, right? I mean, that's what we are. We're all entertainers trying to sell our wares like carnival pitchmen, right?
Yep.
He was a guy that did it the right way. And so to be able to have access, to be able to see that and touch it and taste it and learn from them is like I said, those are the experience that reshape your perception of the world.
You got it. Long before books, long before internet, there were people doing inspiring things around every corner. And one of the secrets to life is to find those stories and allow yourself to be inspired and moved by them. So thanks for sharing that story. That's a real tribute to the man.
Thank you.
Now, let me ask you, what do you got going on? What's next for David Rutherford?
Oh man, Jesus! I've got my girls have a swim lesson this morning, and no, I appreciate it. Geez. So professionally, my biggest thing from, just from a corporate level, our big thing is we're moving into online training. And that's really where I've wanted to do it for the last 3 or 4 years because two of my close friends, Jeff Nichols, who's one of the top strength and conditioning coaches in the country, and then my other friend, Mike Ritland, who has a massive podcast and is a big time dog trainer. They both have online training business and have done very well. And so, a few years back, they're like, Rut, man, you got to do this. And it's something I've always wanted to do it. But when you're doing, 40, 50 events a year, I do 3 or 4 veterans charities a year. I do a lot of nonprofit stuff. And that when I was in the TNQ podcast, I was spending 3 months a year, 3 months a year over at Marcus's ranch recording. So, just didn't have the time. But thank God for the quarantine, man, because it put me in one place, it kept me at home, and it let me do the work. So we've been working our butts off, and we're going to be releasing the first Frog Logic Institute program that we're going to call it, and it's going to be the Embrace Fear training module. We're going to release that in September.
Whoa! So your philosophy is going to be a course. It's going to be a program.
Yes.
Man. Okay, yeah. Dave, here's my Visa number. Write this down. 4515. Did you get that? So you guys, you got to check this out. And you mentioned earlier that you got another book coming too. So let's hear about that.
Yeah. So the book is going to be the Team Life book. I started writing it in 2017. And got about a quarter way into it and then kind of slowed down. 2018 for me in terms of performance coaching was the biggest year I've had to date. And I was able to work with the 2018 Collegiate World Series champions, the Oregon State Beavers. And then I also was in my 3rd year of working with the Boston Red Sox, who then went on to have the greatest team in Boston Red Sox history and won the World Series championship. And so those experiences really kind of shifted the narrative a little bit and gave me a truckload of new information to be able to add in. And so I started doing that, and I'm just, again, timing to be able to sit down and just write. So I'm about 50-60% done with the Team Life book and hope to release that in the fall, late fall sometime.
Fantastic. So you have a lot, other than your daughter's swimming lessons, you actually have a lot going on, man, a lot to be excited for.
I run that podcast. I try and put out a new podcast every week,
yes,
and it's just me and a couple people that help with that. I do YouTube videos. I'm doing online presentations weekly, a couple a week right now. Thank God for that as a thing now. And at the same time, raise 4 daughters, try and be a good fiance. And the number one thing I have to start really thinking about is, because our plans were pretty dramatically altered with COVID, is, when I'm going to marry this incredible woman who's changed my whole life, my whole way of thinking. So.
I was going to ask you, what's the date? So no date yet?
No, it was supposed to be about 3 weeks ago. We were supposed to be over. Yeah, we were going to do a nice little service over in Europe and just with immediate family. And we pulled the trigger back in January once we start the spread. It started to happen. So we got to figure out here when it's going to happen and how we're going to do it. So.
Move the day. Well, man, you know what? I'm going to be celebrating with you in spirit when it happens, because that's going to be a big day. And my tribe will have caught this, but I love how you took the, thank God for COVID-19. Otherwise I wouldn't have had time to sit down. I love how you flip everything into the positive or into the, what's the takeaway? What's the learning? What's the unexpected benefit? And it's not about faking positivity. It's about finding it.
100%. I mean, there's, I swear to God, I always joke that if I ever found the person who said "fake it until you make it," I'd choke them out, right?
Yeah.
But there is a component in the self-confidence book that says false motivation is better than no motivation at all, and that's different, right? That's different than faking something. That's different than lying about a particular mindset. What it is you're learning how to dig deep in those hardships, in those moments where you're getting pummeled by the negative insurgency is just beating the snot out of you.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't find something to grab onto, whether it's a concept, whether it's an experience, whether it's a person that can pull you out of that abyss, man, then you are going to, just linger in that brutality, that negative mindset, because the negative insurgency is literally hunting us day in and day out.
It's real, and it's every day, and it's relentless.
Relentless. That is the greatest word to describe negativity.
Yes, sir. David, I got to thank you. I mean, I want everyone to get from you what I got from you. So they can find you at teamfroglogic.com. Mm-hmm. And on Twitter, what's the Twitter handle?
It's at Team Frog Logic. I've kind of gone off Twitter.
Okay.
It's just the negativity is just so pronounced, and I know it's not the right thing to do. It's just I needed a break from it, so I stopped posting there. But I am on Instagram and Facebook at Team Frog Logic.
Perfect. I'll put those in the show notes for everyone to check out. David, I'm grateful for you for not only this show today, and I told my tribe last night in our Facebook private group, this is going to be the best interview I've ever done, and I was not wrong. You delivered in spades, my friend. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chris.
I wish you the best, and as soon as that course comes out, like I said, you're going to recognize my name. I'm going to be there because I want to support you in any way I can. If you need help being agile, I know a guy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
And
so much.
I would love to have another conversation with you down the road when the time is right to hear about how you're progressing and to just help you and serve you in any way I can, David. And I thank you for spending the time with me today.
Thank you so much. God bless you and your family, Chris.
And to you, David. Wow, what a great conversation. David, thank you for bringing your passion, your fire, your ideas. I know this will go down as one of my favorite episodes of all time. I hope it's one of yours as well. Now listen, you got to check him out. Grab some of his books over at teamfroglogic.com. You can also find him on Instagram and Facebook at Team Frog Logic. And make sure you subscribe to his show, the Team Frog Logic Podcast. Special thanks to Jana for helping make this whole thing happen. And as for me, you can reach out at badassagile.com or find me on Twitter at badass_agile. And don't forget to join the Facebook group and look for us on YouTube. Guys, thanks for tuning in all the way to the end. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. And until then, stay badass.